Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. In this podcast, we will be deconstructing and highlighting the different aspects of grief and loss. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampatella. My name is Dr. Christina Zampatella, and you are watching the podcast Phoenix Rising. Today, we're going to be speaking with Amanda Woolston, who is a licensed clinical psychologist with the Center for Grief and Trauma Therapy. And today's topic is going to be about ambiguous loss. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes. So I have a bachelor's and master's degree in social work, and I'm getting my doctorate in social work. So I always say I'm a lifer. I'm a part of the social work cult. And so I'm just always going to keep going back for more. And social work has helped me really understand a lot of like the cultural and social aspects of grief. So my background plays a big part in the work I do. I am a licensed clinical social worker. So that means I can provide therapeutic services as well as other social work interventions that create social change and help people live better lives. And so right now I'm working at the Center for Grief and Trauma Therapy in Wilmington, Delaware, of which you are familiar. Full disclosure, Dr. Z is my boss. I really overall focus on human suffering and suffering less. And so I find that I can help most anybody. But my main specialties are adoption, foster care, other forms of like family separation or children being displaced. And so those are really, really my areas of passion and focus.
And that's been a huge part of your career.
Yes.
And you've made a lot of effort to really enact change and help people heal from those kinds of those losses.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes.
And so you also work as an adjunct professor.
Yes. So sometimes I teach practice and policy classes at Westchester University. Since 2014, I've been supervising their BSW and MSW students, and I have 3 students right now. And I also teach psychology and sociology for Cecil College. So I'm busy when I'm not, and when I'm not doing that, I live outside of Philadelphia, so I have 2 boys and a husband and 5 cats and a dog. I'm on my town council. So I try to keep involved with lots of different things.
Lots of spare time.
Yeah.
Lots of spare time.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about ambiguous loss. How would you define, what is that? What is that?
And I think it's funny because it can be really hard for people to define, and that's like you're experiencing what it is, because it's loss that's not definable. It really doesn't have like firm boundaries or like a construct that is easily understood by the person who's experiencing it. Ambiguous loss often gets confused with disenfranchised grief. And so sometimes people will give one definition for both of them, but they're really distinct concepts. And so like by contrasting them, it helps me better understand what they are. And so from what I understand from the psychologist who coined the term ambiguous loss, Dr. Pauline Boss in the 70s, is ambiguous loss is a loss that because of the nature of the loss, the person can't allow themselves to recognize it as a loss or allow themselves to grieve it or experience it. Whereas disenfranchised grief is more cultural and social, and there's no, your society, your culture, your family will not allow you to experience the grief, or it's so unrecognized or unseen that there's no mechanism to mourn and to have other people understand what's going on. And so you can have an ambiguous loss that you're not allowing yourself or recognizing for yourself because it's being moderated by your society, or it's being outright rejected. So sometimes they overlap. Disenfranchised grief is kind of like an all or nothing. Either it's allowed or it's not allowed. Mm-hmm. And then other scholars put grief on like a hierarchy that societies will say, this, you're allowed to grieve this more and this less under these circumstances, to kind of like define what grief is in a culture. And so sometimes if somebody's experiencing a loss that doesn't culturally fit into their group or their community, they may try to, I think I've heard you call it auto-oppression. I think it's where it kind of overlaps here, is like they may try to suppress it in themselves.
Right.
As social creatures, it's not inherently part of our social survival to stand out and grieve in ways that people won't accept or that put us at risk for rejection. And so we might try and stuff it down, and then it becomes our own kind of ambiguous loss. Like, what do I do with this?
Right. Right. So there's like a sense of, there's a lack of self-compassion in those cases, and not even a recognition of the indicators that there are even losses that are occurring. So disenfranchised loss has so many different characteristics with it, and different, like you said, social aspects of not being recognized as losses and whatnot. But with ambiguous loss, it's almost like, I didn't even know there was a loss.
Yeah, you might not even know.
So what does that look like in somebody who is experiencing ambiguous loss?
There's a book that I really love the title more than anything. It's on Amazon. I'm struggling to think of the author's name off the top of my head, but it's called Whatever Arises, Love That. And it's like whatever emotion. And when I picture emotions, I almost envision them as like a mist, or like something that's rising from my core that wants the attention of my mind, or it wants to be spoken. It needs a voice. It needs a voice.
Okay.
And so I think that if your body, we recognize loss even if it's not a conscious process. Okay. And so sometimes someone will have like a sadness or trouble making decisions, or they just can't describe something, or and that to me is but everything's fine. Like they're saying everything's fine, but clear, like there's some type of incongruence.
I was just going to say incongruence.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, okay, well, let's walk through, steps of like what self-love means to you, self-loyalty, self-compassion, and what would happen if you just let that rise. And instead of, whatever the emotion is, having to like bang down the door for attention, which could result in like, I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know why I'm panicking. I don't know why all of a sudden I don't have any energy.
Kind of in confusion and not really having a sense as to, I don't know where this is coming. Like you said, where is this coming from? But something is happening, but it's a little bit under the surface.
If you open that door and you listen, what would it tell you? And
what are some answers you get from that?
Well, I don't know, I've never opened the door, or if I start crying, I'll never stop, or I can't think of I can't think of this as a loss, or I can't think of this as sad because it'll hurt this person in my life, or like some examples of ambiguous loss. I use a lot of adoption examples. Sure, I see in birth parents who, they've placed a child for adoption, and they're not, am I still a parent? Am I not a parent? And there's not a great like cultural construct for how birth parents, what their actual role is in the lives of children that have been adopted. And there's a lot of cultural messaging about like, oh, well, your child's still alive. Like nothing bad happened to them. They, they now have this great life. Why would you be sad? Why would you feel loss? Or you chose this. I was
just going to say, hey, you made this choice. So really, do you have a right to go? And that and becomes disenfranchised in that way, right? Because you're not being recognized as a parent.
Yeah.
But there's so many losses around that kind of the loss of that kind of potential future, the loss of the reproductive story they may have had in regard to this is what my family was going to look like. And it might be a closed or an open adoption. And that could also create, quite a bit of a difficulty in trying to figure out how to navigate what is the relationship, whether or not it is a relationship that I actually can engage in, or is it a relationship that I have to internalize, but I don't really know what I'm wrapping my head around.
Yeah. What if it's psychological only?
What if it's psychological only?
Which, I mean, I'm adopted, so I'm like part of the community that I provide these interventions to, which is important to me. And so there's, for those of us from closed adoption, there is an unrecognized psychological presence of birth parents to whom we don't know if we'll ever be able to ask questions or clarify to.
That's a heavy thing to carry.
Yeah, and kids will. if they don't know something and someone has not told them that it's okay not to know, their minds will just make something up and they won't realize that they're doing it. Like at one point in my childhood, like I swore I knew that my birth mother had red hair. Like
you had a whole story.
I had a whole story, and my mom was like, "Where did you get that information from? She does not have red hair."
Well, we are creatures. We need a cohesive story.
Yes.
So when we have spaces in our story, we fill them in. That's natural. We don't live in statistics. We live in stories, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So we see that in trauma. I know, right? I'd love to say I came up with that myself, but so when you don't have the opportunity to kind of figure out who you are in the autobiography, you really try to weave that. You try to weave that in.
That is, our brain doesn't like the ambiguity.
No, like, who does?
Because how can I ensure my survival if I don't know what to anticipate in the future? I don't quite understand how the world around me works.
Or who am I?
Or who am I in this world?
Right.
Yeah.
What is my worldview? What is, absolutely.
Yeah. Another exercise, like unintentionally intersecting with ambiguous loss, and I didn't quite realize it later, is when I know you teach psychology too, when I teach the Psy 101 class and we do the Holmes-Ray stress inventory.
Okay.
It's interesting, and students often notice it. It's that stressors, what's considered stressful and therefore putting you at risk of health effects, are things that are transitions,
right,
which are like losing a previous status to go to a new status,
right,
and they tend to notice that their experiences aren't on this stress scale. So there's no mention of graduating from high school or going to college for the first time,
right,
and like we really hone in on that because that's like a perfect, like more simple example of ambiguous loss is you wanted this. You wanted to graduate. You threw a graduation party,
right?
But no one's thinking about, or recognizing for you that you may have lost being at home all the time because now you live in a dorm.
Absolutely.
Your friends are going to go.
Oh, this is supposed to be exciting. Hey, you're getting married or you're moving, and it's like, whoa, wait, hold on. I might be shifting from one identity, how I understand myself in the world, to this other identity, and I don't have that identity. And what does that look like? Right? I should be excited, but that stress scale, just to kind of clarify for everybody, it basically looks at what are the top stressors, and then it kind of whoever came up with
it's so
and the top one is like losing a spouse, losing a child, a divorce, and then kind of going all the way, and I don't know who figured out who is ranking these, and is it that's a good question, look up if it's based on like anything, but like getting married, like I remember when I got married to Jeff, I remember like there's your whole rite of passage that comes with it, right? So I'm sitting at the top of the aisle, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, everybody here in my community, in my society, right in front of me, they all see me as single, right? And so I have this identity of being single. So I'm standing here, just like other rites of passage. So I'm down with, got my dad, and we're walking to the aisle. So I'm no longer single, but I'm also not married yet, right? So I'm in this ambiguous limbo state. And everybody's looking, and I'm trying to get down that aisle as fast as possible because I don't want people looking at me the whole time. And I go up there, and the officiant, goes, hey, Jeff, do you take Christina to be your wife? And of course I do. Oh my God, she's the most amazing thing on the planet. And then, Christina, do you take Jeff? And I'm like, well, he's kind of cute. I got this dress on. There's all these people.
Like, I feel like
I better kind of say yes. And then, they turn you around, and hey, here you are. Man and wife. And then there's the identity of wife. No longer the identity as single. And there was this shifting that happens in taking on that identity, but also this grieving. And this might be a little hard, of my single life. Don't tell Jeff I said that, but this grieving on the single life, not because I wanted to go and gallivant around town, but because it was a sense of this new shift, this new concept of how I'm going to proceed forward in my life.
Yeah.
So to me, would you say that that's an example of an ambiguous loss?
Yes. And that, like, when I love the back and forth conversations of like, when you say something, I'm like, oh, and I think that's such a good like way to handle ambiguous loss is to just talk about it, because you saying that reminded me of when I reunited with my birth family. I was raised as an only child, but suddenly when I reunited, I had brothers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's like going from being single to being married. It's like, I knew how to be single. I don't know how to be married.
Right.
And I experienced that too when I got married, but like really like one of those pinnacle moments for me where I was like, I am at an identity deficit was when now I have siblings and I don't know how to be a sister. I've never been one before. And when I visited my family for the first time, both of them were, I think the older one, it was 17, and my younger brother was maybe 12. And I'm in the bathroom and they're standing outside the bathroom door waiting for me because they want to hang out. And I've never had siblings wait out, like bang on a bathroom door. Like, come on, let's go play.
What was that like for you?
It was weird because it was really, I just had never experienced it before, but I loved it because I really felt wanted. And
that's huge.
And I've always been wanted. Like my birth family wanted me. They just couldn't raise me. And my adoptive parents definitely wanted me. But it's still this very strange experience to define being wanted for yourself when being wanted is ever some sort of question. And so like them and I'm like, is this what siblings do? Do they not give each other any privacy when they're going to the bathroom? Like it was novel it seems so silly and it would have annoyed anybody else.
No, it totally makes sense. Absolutely.
Like anybody who grew up with their siblings would be like, oh my gosh, go away. But I'm just like, I'm coming.
Hang out. That's cool.
Is this what siblings, because I know how to be a cousin.
Are you hearing everything? Yeah. Like what's going on?
Like, is this cool for you? Yeah. And like I literally like consciously went through an inventory. What is a cousin like? What is a mother like? What is what are boundaries of being a sister? Because you're not a friend.
There's so many adjustments.
Yeah.
So many adjustments you have to make. Do you find, in terms of like emotions that come with ambiguous loss, would you say it's the entire spectrum of just depending on the person, depending on the loss, how they're interpreting the loss, who they are?
Yeah.
It really varies. How do we help somebody giving them a voice, right? Like if you and I were, best friends and we were hanging out and I wanted to be able to support you in trying to come to terms with these changes and these ambiguous losses, what could I do to help you with that other than talk to you? Because I don't want to, disenfranchise, right? I don't want to disenfranchise you. I want to be able to say, hey, I'm here for you. What can I actually do to give you that voice that makes you feel heard, but doesn't make you feel so raw and so vulnerable that it ends up making you want to like yank yourself back? Yeah. What can I do?
Well, I use an example of a really close friend of mine who I had just gone through the first parts of my reunion with my biological family, and I was struggling to voice who I was now. I was struggling to talk about myself as a sister. I was struggling to refer to both of my mothers because there's a lot of issues of like hierarchy too, like who's more of a mom or who's a real mom. There's all these like social political things in adoption about like creating enough space for more people. And I just was like, if I call my birth mother by her first name, should I call my adoptive mother by her first name to be fair? Like it's just, and I'm struggling and I can't. And she just said, Amanda, just say whatever. And it's my job to figure it out. Like I don't have judgment. If you were to say Holly for your adoptive mother and then call her mom in the next sentence, I'm not thinking anything about that. I'm not thinking, oh, she must love her more, or I'm not. It's
judging.
Just talk.
You need me not to judge.
Yes.
Just to give you space and not to give advice too. Oh, you know what? You should call her Holly or you should call her mom. Yeah. It is
admitting I don't know either.
Yeah.
And so
I say, wow, I can really see that you're really trying to figure that out. you know, and I'm just, trying to reflect back to you, the what I'm seeing for you, and to let you know that I'm really here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to give you that sense of you're a safe place for me to come to. And if I need to come back to you to talk to you, about it, that that you're going to be able to come to this place, and I'm not just going to be like, what the heck is she talking about this time? It's just, hey, Dad, this is a big thing to try to come to terms with.
Yeah.
Would you say there are other types of ambiguous losses that are difficult for family? Okay, let me tell you where I'm going with this. I'm thinking about like people who are struggling with drug abuse, and those people who don't have a sense as to, is this going to end? Well, there's a non-finite loss, right? But so many losses that come from, this is the kid that used to be, and this is the child that they've been. I mean, I lost my brother from a drug overdose, and I remember just watching, like losing him along the way. And it was non-finite, which we'll talk about here shortly, but there was also this, like, what am I losing?
Right.
Like I've lost, like we were like this as children. My family was like this when I was growing up. And then this drug use, I'm just watching him deteriorate and trying to figure out what my relationship is with him now. Like, do I pull back from that relationship? Do I keep trying to engage with it? I mean, he's not even like there, so that kind of loss gets mixed up for me. I don't know about you, but it mixes up. Like, I don't know if this is ever going to end, which unfortunately it did. But I also, in this interim period, I don't know who I'm connected to. And that feels ambiguous to me. Yeah. Does that?
Yeah, there's those two main components of ambiguous loss, where someone's psychologically present, but not physically present, and where someone is physically present, but not psychologically present. And so Pauline Boss, I believe, like her first research sample was of, stereotypically, it was of fathers who were like kind of disengaged from their families, but still coming home every night. And the grief that children would go through because they couldn't, he's there, but his
the father
attention,
he doesn't have.
Yeah, the attention is on the newspaper, not on me.
Right.
And she expanded that to like understanding parents in general, and when they circumstances outside their control that keep them from being present, and having like a major injury or a drug and alcohol issue is part of that, because it can keep people from being who they really are, and it can keep them from being psychologically present. And so you have someone physically who's a physical body in front of you. And sometimes like where even codependency can like kick in is because they still show you flashes of who they are. And so you have this hope, and just, if I just did more, I could bring them back. But you're, when someone's out of it and they're not someone that's familiar to you anymore, because they're in an altered state because of a substance. You're like grieving the loss of a person that's right in front of you that you see flashes of only sometimes. Right. And then that like kicks in, it can kick in this kind of like, if I could just do more, then they could be who then I won't have to lose them as they stand right in front of me. I can prevent this loss if I could just fix them.
That's hard, because if you're the type of person that's like a helping person, like you and I, in the fields that we have, there's also, I think, an extra level of, I should be able to do this. I went to school for 9 years to learn how to help, and I've got this person right in front of me who I grew up with. Isn't this the kind of person that I should be able to get through to? Right. Well, and just not having it's not really about me, right? It's about the choice of the other person. But loving that person so much, of trying just figure, what is my role? Where's my boundary? There's a lot of boundary issues around all of ambiguous loss, isn't there? Yeah. If I view codependency, there's a lot of ways that people view it. It's like, sometimes it's an addiction to relationship, or it's an addiction to control, or but I view it, depending on the circumstance, is like, if I can live part of their life for them, then that will prevent my loss of them. Oh, say that one more time. If I can live part of their life for them, right? Like if I could just pick up the slack for the things they're not doing anymore, if I can be the one who like calls their parole officer so that they don't go away to jail, if I can be the one who kind of makes up and prevents consequences from happening to them, then I don't have to lose them. Then I remain connected to them. So it's an attachment issue too. Yeah, yeah. An insecure attachment, because there's no security there. No. Where there's a sense of, I can be close to you, but I can be independent. This is more of like anxious attachment
Yes.
where, oh my God, please don't go away. I'm just
Yep.
going to, anything
Yeah.
I can do to keep, connected to you.
Yeah.
And we know there's a huge impact on somebody's sense of self,
Yep.
especially their sense of safety within relationships and self-esteem. Because when we have another person that we're working so hard to help, we've kind of got them as priority. Our own needs begin to take a back seat. And then as a result of that, what are we telling ourselves with that?
Yeah.
Where's our worth? And so you have to, pulling away from somebody that you're trying to help and then continuing to watch them deteriorate. I cannot, from a personal perspective, that ripped me apart to watch him go through that and have to go, I'm just watching from the sidelines and I don't even know what to do. And you don't know how that's going to end.
Yeah.
So.
And that's like what we said in the beginning, like where that self-loyalty and that self-compassion kick in are in that, I'm only really capable of living one life and nobody's going to live mine for me but me. And how do I focus on that? And because it's hard to think about like, oh, well, then I'm putting myself first. And some people just really are adverse to that. But in a way, those good boundaries also honor the person that you otherwise would be trying to live for or rescue. Not only because you could be enabling them and not realizing it, but because sometimes the greatest gift that you can give to another person is their own choices, their own autonomy, their own independence, that even if they choose the wrong thing, maybe that's the only thing they ever really felt like they chose in their life. Right. And so taking like a strengths perspective, so as to just, and then what would happen if you stopped trying to prevent the loss by constantly intervening? And what would happen if you just allowed yourself to grieve it?
And maybe you don't know what to do with yourself because maybe part of your identity has been tied up into that.
Yeah.
So pulling, but like I've seen that with parents and children. Yep. So when you are working with somebody in therapy who is, the person who's experiencing that ambiguous loss, who keeps trying to step in and save that other person, is one of the things that you work on is boundary setting and then also grieving. They're having to pull back.
Yes.
And what that means, like, okay, now I've got this time. I've been ignoring myself. Now, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to take care of myself? Wait a minute.
Yes.
Nobody's been taking care of me. I haven't been taking care of me.
Yeah.
So then it's a matter of rebuilding their identity.
Yeah.
And rebuilding like the life that they wish that they had.
I think that's a big problem when it comes to specifically like addiction and anything involving codependency. If you're working with a person struggling with codependency, is that people tell them the right answer all the time. The right answer is to set boundaries. It's to stop picking up the phone. It's to stop constantly sending money. But what they don't tell the person is what they need to replace it with, what they could, I don't like the word should, but what they could be doing instead.
Right.
Like, and that's something that I, as a therapist, I always try to make sure that I'm not suggesting someone give something up, but not without telling them what it is they could replace it with, because it's not going to be successful. So something I might do is, if you find what your triggers are, where you're really going to give in to a boundary issue, a boundary violation, a request you really don't want to do, and find what is enticing enough that you could do to pull yourself away from that, so that you still get this sense of having done something, but this time it was healthy. This time it aligned you with your new goals of not giving in or not enabling. And so for some of my clients, that might look like they put on like really loud, angry music and they just let it distract them, or they go and they write down what they would have done instead of doing it. And then they take a mindfulness moment to honor, like, every page in this book is a step in the right direction, even if I don't keep my boundaries every time. And like building up that progress over time in like a tangible way. And all of this is evidence of I am becoming less codependent and more interdependent. I am taking better care of myself.
God, what a rebuilding that happens.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are cultural differences?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When we're talking about ambiguity, ambiguous loss, expectations of interpersonal relationships, because there might be, there might be expectations, not of codependency, but of, I'm not dropping the ball with you. You know, for certain cultures, it might be,
Yes.
no, I'm going to be here the whole time. So how does a person navigate the different cultural, because that's not easy. Not only are we not taught about ambiguous loss, but we sure as hell aren't talking about, you know, oh, wait a minute, in this culture, it's not pathologized, meaning there's nothing unhealthy about it. And if there is a clinician, and not, you know, we're not necessarily talking about being clinician, we're going to do it anyway, because here we are. But as a clinician, if we are not taught the cultural sensitivity around those differences, we can do a massive misstep. So let's take it out of the therapy room. And you and I are here we are. We're best friends again. And by the way, I totally love you. So, but you know, here we are, best friends again. But you're from a whole different culture than mine. And so I'm just kind of like, oh, come on, you know, like, I'm Italian. We're crazy. Like, you are not getting away with, you know, if you're, you know, Italian woman, we are all up in your business. And that's just a cultural expectation. But maybe you're, you know, from, you know, first generation English, you know, background.
Stiff upper lip.
Stiff upper lip.
More reserved. Yeah.
More reserved. And I should tell you, I won't go into it, but there's a whole story about my crazy Italian family. Anyway, one of these days I'll tell you. So my question for you is, like, how do we navigate that as friends?
I love the concept of cultural humility. And it's this place of there's cultural competence and there's cultural humility, and they always should go together. And cultural competence is the ability to be effective with another person despite cultural differences of any kind. And cultural humility is a state of receptiveness and openness, where you might not yet know what to do, but you have an openness to where a person can inform you, and then you know how to follow their lead, but still, like, maintain your own cultural practices and your own values. And so I love the idea of being just open and understanding what does a bias feel when it arises in your body, you know, and if you think someone's grieving the wrong way, or they're being disrespectful, or, you know, that is a bias, and you may be right or wrong, but that tends to feel a certain way in your body, just like other types of biases. You see someone else out and about in life that you don't understand, or you feel judgmental towards them because of they're covered in tattoos or something. I can use that one because I have tattoos. You know, but that bias
what
is
does
a
it feel
feeling.
like? What does that feel like?
I think it's different for every person, but for me, it's like, it's a very, like, heaviness in my chest. And I know that it, whatever thought or that's happening is something I need to question before I just operate off of how this emotion is driving me.
That requires a lot of mindfulness to be able to connect what you're thinking and feeling to how your body is expressing itself, or also called, you know, somaticizing, being, you know, bringing it out. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is that our job is really to kind of step back and listen, and really just try to be like, okay. So Brene Brown, who is my hero, she'll say, you know, be curious.
Yes. With the curiosity.
And don't make judgment around it.
Yeah.
Because you're not living in those shoes. But isn't there, as therapists, and again, just thinking about it, it's like, where's the fine line between this is a cultural difference and no, actually, this is really unhealthy.
Yeah.
And that, you're right, the cultural competence, the cultural humility, lots of other kind of ethical concerns of making sure that you have that knowledge. So that is really, I mean, great examples of ambiguous loss. And I'm glad that there's some good, actual tangible things that people can do to help the people that they care about, the people that they work with, trying to really make space for that person to have those experiences, but also to help a person understand that it's okay to grieve all kinds of things, that we don't just grieve the death of somebody. We don't just grieve, you know, trauma. There are always grief and trauma, not always trauma and grief, but always grief and trauma, right? But, you know, the losses of moving. And I remember when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I didn't know anybody. And I walked into the grocery store and was pissed because the bread was on the wrong side of the grocery store. It's supposed to be on the right, not on the left. Clearly, nobody talked to me about it. You know, just kind of trying to wrap my head around the fact that so much had changed. And that was like my breaking point, was was the grocery store.
Reminder.
It's a reminder.
Yeah.
Not the fact that, my house is back here, all my friends are back here. So all different kinds of ambiguous losses. Well, I think this has been great. Is there anything else that you think that we should know before we wrap up about ambiguous loss?
My parting wisdom on this topic is always, do what you can to reframe your thoughts when you're experiencing ambiguous loss. And sometimes like a really like a go-to way to do that is, rather than focusing on whether or not you should be feeling a certain way, because loss is going to hit you whether or not you want to recognize it. Mm-hmm. Focus on, why is my body or my brain, my nervous system telling me that I need to feel this way? And what is this feeling telling me that I need, and how can I meet that need? Because telling it that it's not, having a broken arm and not putting a cast on it is not going to make the arm heal.
Right. Right.
So instead of shaming yourself for having a feeling, look at the feeling as an evidence of a need, and then work with yourself on, well, what is my body telling me that I need, and then go meet that need.
And then people need to learn how to get in touch with their bodies.
Yeah.
So don't shoot all over yourself.
Don't shoot all over yourself. That's what I'm hearing you say. I love,
and also learn how to connect to your bodily sensations, which might require some help, because we are often so divorced from our bodies.
If you need help doing it, that's a therapist, counselor.
Absolutely.
Those are things, and that's a lot of people don't understand. You don't have to be sick or mentally ill.
Good point.
A lot of counseling models are based on your life goals, not necessarily something has to be wrong with you.
Right.
So if you just want to learn how to level up or manage something better, like a counselor or a therapist can do that with you too. They can teach you.
Absolutely. Don't have to come to therapy. If you think it's like, oh, I just have to have depression or anxiety, it can be, I can go in there and try to work these things out, because there's nothing pathological about grief.
Yep.
I mean, there's a whole reason why the insurance companies won't pay for it anyway, because it's not pathological, and it never should be pathologized. So I'm hearing you say that if you really are struggling with this, trying to wrap your head around, how do I navigate understanding how I'm experiencing my grief? Am I even grieving something that makes sense? Having somebody that has a good understanding about grief, not just somebody who has a general, feeling around their understanding around mental health issues, but somebody who's actually really trained in grief can help you hone in on the subtleties of grief that perhaps, because I don't know about you, I didn't have a class in grief until graduate school, and that was an elective. Yeah. Right. So thank you so much for coming here today. And I'm so excited that you're on the podcast, and thank you for all that you do here. But thank you for all of your knowledge about ambiguous loss.
It was my pleasure.
Good.
Thank you for listening to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. We want to be a resource for anyone who is experiencing loss, and this is a simple way you can help us spread the word. Check out our show description. There you'll find a link to connect with me on social media, as well as helpful articles and resources.